What was the Iran deal that President Trump ripped up? The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, more commonly known as the JCPOA, was the big nuclear deal crafted under President Obama. It's an agreement that President Trump has repeatedly slammed. Donald Trump now insists he's going to land a far better deal, but that could prove to be a daunting task. From the BBC in Washington, D.C., I'm Asma, and welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. I began my conversation with Wendy Sherman by asking her how these talks with Iran actually started. The final deal was worked on and signed by a number of countries, including China, Russia, and the European Union. And, frankly, it's easy now to forget how extraordinary it was for the U.S. and Iran to make a deal like this, because, as you all might know, the U.S. and Iran have not had a formal diplomatic relationship for decades. Wendy Sherman told me that the seeds of this all began when Iran reached out to the Obama administration through this secret channel. She said that the Iranians wanted to talk because their economy had been under enormous pressure, and they were keen to see if they could negotiate some sort of sanctions relief from the U.S.
President Obama made a very critical decision. He knew that we could either negotiate with Iran and try to do this diplomatically, or we could face war. And we had gamed this out. We all knew that Iran could strangle the Strait of Hormuz. We all knew that Iran could take on our partners and allies in the region, that the world economy could be at stake. So the president thought it was critical to see what diplomacy could achieve. And he also made another critical decision, which was to say to Iran that he would consider a small, very small, civil nuclear enrichment program for civil purposes if there was intrusive monitoring and verification. The United States had never said that before. We don't believe that a country has a right to enrichment. So he opened the door. We worked on that draft. I asked our team to write what they thought would be the ideal agreement. They wrote 100 pages, including technical annexes. All of the team, no matter what their role, met in a conference room for 2 days, and we went over that line by line, not because we knew we'd get that exact deal, but because I needed to know, every member of the team needed to know what we were trying to achieve.
Was the crux of what you wanted to achieve was that you were trying to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon?
Absolutely.
So you say that Iranians came to you all, and you decided that it was worthwhile to negotiate because you said this a moment ago that otherwise it would lead to war.
Yes.
And can you help me understand that? Because the United States and Iran, as you know, have been at odds for years, have had no formal diplomatic relations. But what made you think that it would lead and erupt into war at that particular moment?
We didn't know that it would happen at that moment, but we thought it would indeed happen. And Iran was clearly improving their nuclear capacity every single day. The Iranians had gone the enrichment of uranium route, and they had gotten up to 20% enriched uranium. From 20% to 90%, which is what you need to have enough material for a nuclear weapon, was a leap we did not want them to make.
Were you trying to stop it, or were you all trying to pause it, the development of a nuclear weapon?
To stop it, we were trying to ensure they could never get enough material for a nuclear weapon. So we saw them accelerating their program. We didn't like where it was headed. We knew the breakout time was getting shorter and shorter to them having enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon. Of course, they then have to create the weapon. They now have to attach it to a launch vehicle. They were a ways away from having a nuclear weapon, but nonetheless, they were moving in a direction that was unstable and very bad for us and for the world.
You mentioned a moment ago that the negotiations took some time. I believe it was about 18 months in total, a year and a half. Tell me about when you first met your Iranian counterparts.
So I had met an Iranian delegation even before 2013, actually starting in 2011, when Sayed Jalili was head of their delegation. He was a leader in the Iranian government. He was assigned to lead this delegation. It was very performative. We traveled all over the world. Iran made us go to Almaty, Kazakhstan twice because it took 19 hours for the Americans to get there. We were in Iraq during a sandstorm. It was pretty crazy. And all of the discussions happened in Farsi. But we didn't make much progress. Then Rouhani became president. And things...
In 2013,
yes,
is that right?
2013.
Okay.
And things changed. Javad Zarif became the foreign minister, and he led the delegation. He had spent 30 years in the United States. He spoke perfect English. He knew us. The delegation spoke English. The negotiations were now in English. And Abbas Arachi...
They were in English.
Were in English. And Abbas Arachi, who was my counterpart and now the foreign minister, we began much more serious negotiations and ultimately brought in this short-term agreement. And ultimately it led to 28 days in a Vienna hotel, the Palais Coburg. Secretary John Kerry came for the last 2.5 weeks and spent time in these negotiations to get to a final deal.
You mentioned a name that I want to ask you more about, Abbas Araghchi. You say he was your counterpart in the Iranian delegation. He's now Iran's foreign minister. We see his name tossed around in the current talks. We saw news that, in fact, he was just recently in Pakistan. What's he like? How did you build rapport with him? If rapport is the right word to use.
Rapport is not a bad word. I don't believe these kind of negotiations are about trust. I don't trust Iran today. They don't trust me.
Did they not trust you at the time? So at the time you did not trust them, and
No.
Did not trust you
It was
all?
about respect. I respected that they had national interests, some of which made no sense to me, but in their culture, in their framework, it did to them. Abbas Arachi is very smart, very tough, knows every detail of the deal. Now, I try to understand they were human beings, even though we were quite different culturally. And Abbas and I became grandparents at the same time. We shared
During the talks. During the talks,
we shared photos of our grandchildren. So you do things like that, not because it's going to change what President Obama and Secretary Kerry required of our team, but it does make us more human. And having to deal with each other and be in the same hotel for 28 days, it helps.
Ambassador, you mentioned that during the final stage of negotiations, there was this period of intense talks where you all spent essentially nearly a month in that hotel in Vienna.
Very pressured, very exhausting. At one point, I remember talking to my husband, who was, of course, back in Washington, D.C., and really focusing on our daughter. And I said, I don't know. And I said, I'm so sorry to be away for so long. And he said, you are part of history. This is important. Having that kind of support was critical. One of our team members' kids made sock puppets for everybody in our team and sent them to Vienna, which was really sweet and very cute. The Europeans could always go home on the weekend because it was a short flight from Vienna if they needed to go home. Not so much for the Americans. So I tried to work things out so that team members could go home for a weekend or go home for a few days, so they wouldn't feel so locked in. That wasn't true for me. And
you were there for, what was it, 28 days,
28
you said, right?
days, every day.
28
ate
days.
One meal outside of the hotel in those 28 days.
Did you ever feel that, as much as you thought a deal was within sight during that time period, that there were moments where it seemed like it all might just fall apart?
Many times. many times.
Yeah?
There was a point, I remember, in the Beau Rivage Hotel in Geneva, and we all came to agreement on what we thought was a set of parameters for a final deal. And soon after, The Supreme Leader gave a speech and set out a whole bunch of new parameters, new thresholds that had to be reached. I'm not even sure Zarif knew that was coming. And we had a very difficult meeting suddenly in Geneva with the Iranian delegation, where we had to figure out a way to meet some of what the Supreme Leader was asking for and keep the deal moving forward. But it was a very tense and very difficult time. Secretary Kerry is an extraordinary negotiator. He never runs out of energy, and he rarely gets angry. But he got so angry at that day-long meeting in Geneva that he banged his hand on the table, and a pen flew across the table and hit Arachi. He didn't mean to, of course, but it was a moment that showed how tense and difficult a moment it was.
So the final deal was 110 pages long. It is finalized, signed in the summer of 2015. And in the end, and I'm going to I'm going to summarize this here, but in the end, Iran agreed to limit its nuclear activities and allow in international inspectors in return for the lifting of some economic sanctions. I know that the Obama administration lauded this as a major achievement. I also recall at the time there were some prominent Democrats who criticized it. And the crux of their criticism, in summary here, was that they had concerns that Iran would not moderate its nuclear program as a result of this deal. And that in some ways this deal might in fact actually help bolster the regime, might help it actually acquire a nuclear weapon in the long run. They felt the deal, in particular, I will say, I think because of the sunset clauses, right, which were these key parts of the agreement that expired in 10 to 15 years, they felt that it didn't do enough to limit Iran's nuclear programs. What do you make of the criticism that the deal was simply too limited?
I respect that people had differences of opinion for many different reasons. But our whole notion, and I think what President Obama understood, is if we could have these very severe limits for 15 years, and quite frankly, many other limits for 20 and 25 years, that gave us time to see what else we could achieve.
Was dismantling it as a whole, sorry, Ambassador, was that just not on the table? The Iranians would not agree.
It was not on the table. Iran.
Did you all try to discuss it, or you did not try to?
Of course,
you did.
But Iran is a culture of resistance, and part of its national identity is this ostensible right of enrichment, which, as I said, America still does not agree to, but some of our European colleagues do. And Iran's believing that we were trying to take away the country's right to its own sovereign sense of itself. Today, we are seeing this again. Iran is not going to give up the right to enrich at some point. So I think we understood what the limits were over time, but of course, we preferred to eliminate everything, but that wasn't going to happen. We also developed channels of communication that we thought would be important. And soon after the deal, a bunch of American sailors found themselves in Iranian territory and got picked up by the Iran military. In other times, that would have been a disaster that would have gone on for some time. They would have become hostages. Instead, John Kerry could pick up the phone, call Javad Zarif, foreign minister of Iran, and within 24 hours, those sailors were free. Did we think it would change everything? No. But did it open a door? Yes. And could we use that door? The Europeans very much wanted the middle-class market of Iran. They wanted to get their car manufacturers back into Iran. They saw a real possibility for commercial success. The U.S. not so much, because Iran didn't want to see Americans on the ground at the time. But it did open channels, and if we were getting close to that 15 years, we could go back to the negotiating table and see what more we could get. And now Iran has a new weapon, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before this war began.
Was that never, by the way, part
No.
of that? Was that never perceived to
No.
be a threat when you were negotiating with them, you said?
It was not. We knew it could become one. We knew it could become one. And certainly if we went to war, we had spent many hours gaming that out. But it was not used as a leverage point in the negotiation.
Another major criticism of the JCPOA, of the deal that you worked on, is that because it lifted sanctions on Iran and granted access to billions of dollars of unfrozen assets, is that it could use that sanctions relief to arm its proxies in the neighborhood, organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah. And in fact, you could make the argument that the funds did strengthen the Iranian regime over the years. How do you reconcile that?
So there is no question. The regime is horrible. It has slaughtered its own people. At the time when we discussed some of those frozen assets, a humanitarian channel was set up for those funds to go for food and medications and humanitarian purposes to help out the Iranian people. And if those frozen assets helped on the humanitarian side, there's no doubt it freed up some funds for Iran to deal with its proxies. But had the deal stayed in place before President Trump in his first term withdrew, we would have been able, I believe, to go back to the table to discuss some of these other issues. A lot of people have said, why didn't we do it at the time? Why didn't we discuss proxies and more on missiles and other things of concern? Well, it took us years. The Europeans had been negotiating with the Iranians for a decade, and then it took us 18 months to get this final deal. If we had tried to do other things, we'd probably still be negotiating. And if you do other things, then the Iranians might say, okay, we'll give a little less money to Hezbollah, but we want more sophisticated centrifuges to be able to enrich more uranium. And there's so many elements just on the nuclear side that are so complicated, because every time you agree on what the stockpile can be or what the percentage of enrichment can be, you affect 100 other things, and you have to manage all of them at the same time to ensure you've reached your objective.
The deal was ultimately only in place for 3 years, and during that time period, the International Atomic Energy Agency, known as the IAEA, which was responsible for inspecting Iran's activities, made several reports detailing Iran's compliance with the deal. We also saw the State Department issue a report that said Iran was indeed implementing the agreement. But nonetheless, in May of 2018, President Trump, during his first term, pulled the United States out of the deal. I want to then bring us up to the present, where we are now in Trump's second term. We are now in another moment where the U.S. is trying to reach another deal with Iran. How does this moment feel different to you than 2015?
It feels terrible. I think the president has engaged in a war of choice, not of necessity. I don't think there was an imminent threat to the United States. I think diplomacy was what was called for, not war. I understand the June bombing by the U.S. in Israel. It did set
June of last year,
yes. It did set back Iran's program. There's no doubt about it. But you cannot bomb away knowledge, so you ultimately have to sit down and talk. The Strait of Hormuz was opened before this war, and now I believe that Iran will always feel that it has ownership over the Strait of Hormuz. It will always be a leverage point for Iran. Before this war, we were seeing a recovery from COVID in the world's economy. And now the world's economy is facing great risk, particularly in Asia and the Middle East, because so much of their oil is gotten through the Strait of Hormuz. We are seeing very desperate times for many countries. The U.S. is economically hit hard. It will affect the president in the midterms. here in the United States, but because we have an abundance of oil here, we're probably hit less than the rest of the world. So I believe that President Trump has accomplished giving Iran the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz. He has alienated our European allies because he never included them in this process. He has gotten mixed reviews from our Gulf partners. And, of course, 13 American soldiers have died. Many more have been wounded. Thousands of civilians in the Middle East, including in Iran, have died or been injured. And the Iranian people are not better off. They are worse off because we have a more hardline regime than we had before.
One of the things we've heard from the Trump administration is that they say they were in the midst of talks with Iran, but that they were not serious. That is their argument. They say that they felt the talks weren't going anywhere, and therefore ultimately they launched those strikes in late February on Iran in coordination with Israel. What do you make of that argument?
I think President Trump likes to get quick wins. And he thought he could lay down what was necessary, they could agree on the top lines, and he could have that quick win. I think he has never understood Iran, its history, its culture, how deep and profound their civilization, their sense of their own civilization, their own identity is. This is not Venezuela, which he has often pointed to as such a success. This is not just pulling someone out of a country. This is life and death, war and peace. That's not what Venezuela was about. And Iran is, as I said earlier, a culture of resistance. They lasted in Iran-Iraq war for 8 years. They will not give up easily. They have a pride that we do not understand. It is so deep and so profound and goes back so far. It is so much a part of the 1979 revolution. And they feel that we in the West keep on tricking them. Back in 1953, the U.S. and Great Britain got rid of the prime minister because we were afraid he was going to nationalize oil. That led to the Shah of Iran, who worked well with the West, but was a terrible dictator and oppressor of the Iranian people. We began negotiations under the Trump administration twice, and while those negotiations were happening, attacked militarily. So sort of no wonder Iran wonders whether we are serious, let alone us wondering whether they are serious. These negotiations are hard. They cannot be done in a day. They cannot be done in a week. I had sanctions experts and lawyers and nuclear physicists. You cannot do this just with us terrific diplomats. You need a team of experts who understand all that is necessary here. Our military is exquisite. They have done a remarkable job, but Iran has asymmetric capabilities and they've used them quite well.
If back in 2013, 2014, 2015, Iran really wanted a deal, you say, because of its own internal economy, they reached out via Oman to start conversations with the United States. If that was the case back then, is it your sense, I know there are different people, I know the terrain is different, that Iran also wants a deal, or wants a deal as much as the U.S. and this Trump administration wants?
I think both parties are in a bit of a stalemate at the moment. I think they would do a deal, but we now have an antecedent to all of this, and that is the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz and the American blockade. And in my own view, we won't get to the nuclear negotiation until somehow we unlock that so that oil, helium, fertilizer, and other goods can flow again to the world economy. Now, as we're talking today, ostensibly, Foreign Minister Arachi is putting together some kind of proposal to open the Strait of Hormuz, leaving Iran still in control of it, asking for the blockade to end, unfreezing assets, opening up sanctions. Now, the U.S., I don't believe, is going to agree to all of that. But I could see a deal where there is some suspension on both sides of the blockade and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and a ceasefire for negotiations to happen around the nuclear program. Iran is asking for a permanent end to the war before beginning the nuclear negotiations. And they're asking for opening all the sanctions and opening all the frozen assets before getting to the nuclear concerns. I don't think all of that's going to be acceptable to the U.S., but there is a basis, I believe, here to negotiate. But I note that Foreign Minister Arachi is engaged in diplomacy and building a network for whatever he's proposing. And I wish President Trump were doing likewise.
I have one final question for you, and that is that as I look what has been happening between the United States and Iran, and also the lack of what's been happening, I don't have a real clear sense of how this all ends. There were talks that were supposed to happen this past weekend in Pakistan. Those talks did not actually materialize. You referred to this as a stalemate. Do you see a way to break the stalemate?
I think there are lots of ways to break the stalemate. You have to build partners in this effort. So I think the President of the United States has a lot of diplomatic work to do. I think there's a way to break this stalemate. I think Iran is putting some ideas on the table, and although I don't agree with where they are, I think I could probably work with them, and others could, and President Trump's teams could, with experts at the table, to figure out a way forward.
That's it for The Global Story on YouTube. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. And if you enjoyed our episode, then I should mention that our show, The Global Story, is also available as an audio podcast. You can find us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.